Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar. Before we start, I would like to let you know that there is a Q&A box at the right lower part of your screen where you can type questions during the discussion, and at the end, our speakers will try to reply to all these questions. So today we're here to discuss an important health issue, how to improve the lives of those living with diabetes. Diabetes is a chronic condition that affects hundreds of millions of people and occurs when our body doesn't produce enough insulin or it cannot use insulin effectively. This leads to high blood sugar levels, and that in turn leads to damages of our organs. So diabetes can cause many serious complications. Two important complications is the diabetic kidney disease and hypoglycemias. So here we have today with the top experts in the field to discuss these devastating complications. And we also have two people that live with diabetes. And we will discuss mainly the accomplishments of two IMI projects, the BEAt-DKD and the HypoResolve. So let me introduce you to our speakers. We have with us Professor Maria Gomez. Maria is Professor of Physiology and Head of Diabetic Complications Unit at the Lund University Diabetes Center. Welcome, Maria. We have Dr. Kevin Duffin. Kevin is Vice President of Diabetes, Obesity and Complications at Eli Lilly and Company. Welcome, Kevin. Kevin and Maria are the leaders of the project BEAt-DKD. We also have with us Professor Bastiaan de Glaan. Bastiaan is Professor of Medicine at the Maastricht University and Associate Professor at the Radboud University Medical Center. Welcome, Bastiaan. And Dr. Matthias Müllenborg. Matthias is Senior Director of Public-Private Partnerships at Novo Nordisk. Welcome, Matthias. Matthias and Bastiaan are the leaders of the IMI project HypoResolve. And we also have with us today Mr. Ken Tite, psychotherapist, and Mr. Mike Smith, pharmacist. Mike and Ken are people who live with diabetes and who have participated in these two IMI projects. So let's start. Let's look at what these projects have done. So first, BEAt-DKD. BEAT-DKD was a project that lasted 7 years and aimed at shedding light on the biological mechanisms that lead to diabetic kidney disease, and also aimed at identifying biomarkers of disease progression and response to treatment. But let's ask Maria to tell us, explain to us better what was the need that generated this project on diabetic kidney disease, and why specifically there was a need to identify biomarkers. Maria?
Yes, thank you so much, Clelia. Yes, so we have today an increasing number of people that live with diabetes, in 10 adults today, and that number, it doesn't seem to be slowing down, that tendency to increase. And about 50% of people living with diabetes will develop diabetic kidney disease. And diabetic kidney disease is one of the leading causes of end-stage renal disease, which results then in the need of dialysis and transplantation. So this accumulates significant costs for society, but above all, it also decreases life expectancy and quality of life. So back in 2015, when we started planning this project, the kidney field was somehow stagnated, and that maybe as a result of the lack of introduction of new therapies. So since the introduction of angiotensin-converting enzyme inhibitors in 1993 or angiotensin receptor blockers in a bit later in 2001, not much had happened. So we were in desperate need of more knowledge to be able to offer a bit more for the treatment of DKD, because even after using all the available glucose and blood pressure lowering medications that we had at that time, patients had a significant residual cardiovascular and renal risk. So back then, when we started planning this project, we had a very limited understanding of molecular and cellular mechanisms underlying disease progression, and this is what triggered the disease. But also we had very limited tools to be able to diagnose and monitor, or try to monitor also whether patients were responsive or not to the available treatments. So we were in a desperate need of better tools and more biomarkers. I think you're muted.
Sorry. it's clear how then why this project was generated. Now, 7 years later, what would you say are the most important results that were produced by BEAt-DKD?
Yes, so I think over these years, one of the major contributions that we've made to the field is to have a better understanding today of disease heterogeneity. We understand much better that not all patients have the same disease progression or the same response to treatment. We also discovered new pathways and mechanisms underlying disease, and some of them are targetable. We kind of shifted the focus or intensify the focus on insulin resistant as one of the core things happening and driving DKD. I think that opened up for a whole avenue of research and actions based on this increased knowledge that insulin resistance is very important in DKD, and we will hear more from Kevin later on of some of the activities that triggered. So basically, we've seen during these years, we've seen a renal biomarker transformation. When we started, we had only basically 2 biomarkers to lean on. Those were albuminuria and serum creatinine, and they were very insensitive. There were mere measures of renal filtering, and they only increased late in disease. Whereas today, we have multiple biomarkers that are far more sensitive and that they can measure certain aspects of disease mechanisms. They do change early in disease. They have prognostic value, and they can tell us also, they can guide us and see which patients are responding to each medication. So I think we're in a much better position. The other advance that I would like to highlight that we did over these years is the much better utilization of urine as a source of information. Especially, we exploited the power of urinary vesicles as carriers of information as a form of a liquid biopsy. It's very non-invasive, and you can extract a lot more information than what we anticipated when we started the project. So in essence, we've gone from very imprecise medicine with very little therapeutic options to offer and a kind of a one-size-fits-all to a much more precise medicine approach.
So could you give us an example of how the project contributed to precision medicine?
It's really hard to choose your favorite example, because over these years we produced more than 200 publications to summarize all these discoveries. But I would like to highlight 2 examples. One, we had a very successful pipeline for the discovery of predictive biomarkers. Those are biomarkers that inform us whether the patients are responding or not to a specific treatment. So that resulted in essence into a new EU-funded project that is called PRIME-CKD. That project is ongoing. And the whole goal of that project is to drive the clinical implementation of these new predictive biomarkers. And we are very excited to see that in place. And we're very optimistic that this could result in proper clinical implementation of these findings that arise from BEAt-DKD. And the other thing that I would like to highlight is a very unique and prospective multi-center observational study that the study is called IBEAT, I as imaging BEAT. It explores associations between imaging biomarkers and renal function. This is a study in which Mike here with us today was a study participant. All participants underwent a very deep and thorough phenotypic characterization. We collected a large sample repository, several ancillary studies that are very promising and already giving anticipated results. And the study has now received additional industrial support from Genentech to be able to continue with the follow-up. So I think that is a resource that will allow us to mine and to ask lots of relevant questions in the years to come.
Very nice. So Kevin, Maria described us all these accomplishments that were achieved in BEAt-DKD. Could you explain to us how these outcomes are important and contribute to the research community and to the industry needs?
Sure, be happy to. I work for a pharmaceutical company, and so we're trying to, of course, develop new therapies to help these patients. And to do that, we really need to understand disease mechanisms, pathways, and targets to go after. Maria mentioned that early on, we had identified a group of patients who were especially prone to advancing in their kidney disease. And these were the patients who were the diabetic patients who were insulin resistant. And we happened to be developing at that time a medication that we knew helped to sensitize to insulin. And so then as the project went on, we identified some very, very early markers of diabetic kidney disease. And so what we decided to do at Lilly was to take advantage of this information. And we had in phase 2 this drug that improved insulin resistance. And we measured the same markers that we had measured in IMI to see if they had an effect. And the drug did have an effect. It modulated those markers. And from that, we had a very good idea that the drug would work in diabetic kidney disease. And that drug was approved a couple years ago. It's known as Mounjaro in Europe. And we're continuing to run disease trials in kidney disease with it and with some subsequent medications.
So it's clear that knowledge that was acquired in BEAt-DKD informed clinical trials run by industry. So Kevin, it is important that the results of BEAt-DKD and the knowledge generated can continue to have an impact after the project's end. What have you done to ensure that in BEAt-DKD?
Yeah, I think Maria mentioned one of the things that's critical. One is just publication. Publication is the public record of the science that we develop. And in BEAt-DKD, we had a large number of very good articles that came out and are in the journals today. The data that we generated in BEAt-DKD is stored at the Swiss Institute of Bioinformatics. And so that data continues to be available and used by researchers in the field. And then we continue to collaborate and work with many of the people in BEAt-DKD. And it's probably an underappreciated aspect of what IMI and these consortia bring is the relationships and the collaboration that you have with many of the people you work with. And so we continue that collaboration with a number of the people, a number of researchers that were in BEAt-DKD, and some of them are involved in our trial design, and some of them are involved in early biological mechanism discovery.
Very nice. So now let's look at the other project, at the other IMI project, HypoResolve. So the HypoResolve project is also on diabetes complication, but it is on a different complication that is related to treatment. Treatment with insulin in people living with diabetes can often cause very low levels of sugar, a condition that it's called hypoglycemia, and it is a very serious life-threatening condition. The HypoResolve project lasted 5 years and aimed at understanding better hypoglycemia, how it occurs, if it can be predicted, and how it affects the lives of those with diabetes. Bastian, can I come to you? Could you explain us better what was exactly the need 6 years ago that generated the HypoResolve project?
Yes, thank you, Clelia. I'm happy to do that. So, as you say, hypoglycemia is actually an adverse effect caused by the treatment of diabetes, particularly treatment with insulin. But it's the most common adverse effect, and we see it as a complication in diabetes. So virtually everyone who's been treated with insulin will experience hypoglycemia one day or another. And on average, people with type 1 diabetes experience 2 to 3 events per week, although there are people who experience this on a daily basis. It's a nuisance in that it interrupts the daily activities, but also, as you say, seems to increase the risk of cardiovascular events, and particularly as an association between severe hypoglycemia, defined by the requirement of external help to recover, with a greater risk of cardiovascular morbidity and mortality. There was some uncertainty about the exact definition of hypoglycemia, and this particularly affected the designs of clinical trials. And only recently, before we started the project, the International Hypoglycemia Group had proposed a 3-level classification of hypoglycemia, but this classification lacks sufficient evidence. So we needed more knowledge to support this classification, but also to uncover the pathways underlying the association between hypoglycemia on one end and cardiovascular events on the other. But next to that, we also, in the context of technology, needed to have a better understanding of the clinical psychological relevance of low glucose values reported by continuous glucose monitoring, glucose sensors, particularly in relation to symptomatic hypoglycemia or hypoglycemia detected by people with lived experience in other ways. And we also need to have more insight into the impact of hypoglycemia on quality of life and other patient-reported outcomes, to design a PRO specific hypoglycemia, and also get more insight in the health economic consequence of hypoglycemia, in particular the so-called non-severe events.
So you've set many goals at the beginning of the project. Now that the project has closed, what would you say are the most important accomplishments of the HypoResolve consortium?
Yeah, so we approach this in a kind of a multi-level approach from all different angles, but I think we can highlight a couple of main outcomes. So the first thing that we did was that we constructed a large clinical database of almost 100 trials in which more than 80,000 people with type 1 or type 2 diabetes had participated. And analysis of this database clearly showed there were clear associations between hypoglycemia of any type with cardiovascular events and mortality, and there was no particular glucose threshold below which the occurrence of these events appeared. So virtually every level of hypoglycemia had an association with cardiovascular events. Secondly, we performed a large experimental study among 100 people with type 1 or type 2 diabetes, also controls without diabetes. And these people were all exposed to 1 hour of hypoglycemia, and we measured a whole range of clinical parameters. And one of the outcomes of this study showed that cognitive function declined in everyone when we exposed to hypoglycemia, irrespective of type of diabetes, duration of diabetes, or the level of hypoglycemic awareness, clearly showing a kind of a consistent effect across the whole board. The second important result of that study was that we found that hypoglycemia caused a pro-inflammatory response on all different levels of inflammation. This is important because we think that inflammation of the blood vessel wall contributes to development of atherosclerosis, which in turn increases the risk of cardiovascular morbidity and mortality. So clearly uncovering one of the underlying pathways. Third thing that we did is that we performed a 10-week observational study, 600 people with type 1 and type 2 diabetes, and to study the development of sensitive detective hypoglycemia in relation to patient-reported events. And for this study, we developed an app to track hypoglycemic events in real life and its impact on daily functioning. And this study showed there was very little overlap between hypoglycemia events detected by the sensor with respect to those events that were detected by the person with diabetes, him or herself. Over 2/3 of sensor-detected hypoglycemia were not recognized by the person with diabetes, but vice versa. Also, 40% of the patient-reported hypoglycemic events did not coincide with a low glucose value on the sensor. The good news, however, is that when hypoglycemia was only detected by the sensor, but not by the person with diabetes, this had very little effect on daily functioning, even if these events occurred briefly. So collectively, these data substantially increase our understanding of hypoglycemia, but also provide much more evidence for the classification as this was proposed by the International Hypoglycemia Study Group.
It's very useful for clinicians that manage people with diabetes. Can you also tell us, Bastian, about the work that you did to understand the psychological impact of hypoglycemia on people living with diabetes and on their quality of life?
Yeah, so this was also a very important topic to look for. So we first mapped what was already known, but also performed a couple of studies. And what we found is that we were able to map all the effects of hypoglycemia on psychological aspects. And we found that hypoglycemia had affected almost all domains of quality of life in people with diabetes, but not just in them, but also in partners, in carers, and other family members of people with diabetes. So this is an important thing for the whole family, you can say. So diabetes not only affects people with diabetes, but also the family. We also were able to develop a hypoglycemia-specific patient-reported outcome measure that can be used in the clinical situation, but also in research, particularly in clinical trials. And it's also important to mention that we obtained official qualification advice from the European Medicines Agency, which clearly indicates their interest in this topic and emphasized the importance of using such a PRO in clinical practice and in research.
Very interesting. So, Matthias, shall I come to you? We heard Bastian explaining what are the main outcomes of the work that you did over the past 6 years, sorry. Can you explain why all this work is important on one hand for the research community and on the other hand for large or smaller companies?
Yes, I'm happy to do so. Thank you. So yeah, as Bastian already showed, actually, that from a research perspective, this was super interesting. I think what was unique in this approach was really this very broad approach, and that we looked holistically from many different angles at hypoglycemia. So both from different disciplines in science, but also different solutions out in the solution space. So it's not only about providing a drug, but also really the whole environment of devices and sensors and solutions working together. So that's the unique part here. So from a research perspective, of course, we gathered a lot of data. So at the center, Bastian mentioned it, was the pooled database of was almost 100 insulin trials. So that's a huge asset and available for research, also for further research. So it really showed us gave us a lot of insights, and also sharing of insights across sectors, meaning also across the boundaries in the healthcare system, and that's a good starting point for further research. But also, of course, the insights are valuable for treatment and new solutions. So from an industry perspective, obviously, we already mentioned a little bit the clinical trials for clinical trial practice, super relevant to have, for example, the patient-reported outcome tool that we have developed in HypoResolve for hypoglycemia. That's unique. But also really this collaboration between, for example, device manufacturers, Medtronic, Abbott, and then also the insulin providers was super helpful and unique. And provided us with new insights in that. Then, of course, Bastian mentioned the whole topic that we worked around the classification of hypoglycemia in a joint fashion was very helpful. So we had, for example, very much already in the very beginning of the project, a workshop also with regulators and health technology assessment representatives to how do we evaluate hypoglycemia, and how is that part of the solution? How can we improve that in the course of this project, and which ended up with recommendations in the qualification advice, which is super helpful as well. And then last but not least, of course, this is an opportunity also for small companies. We have, for example, used an app provider, Emotive, in the hypermetric study, an SME. And that is also an invitation really to join and be part and pilot some of the solutions. And so for the IMI projects, it's a good place for small parties to get access to data and to a research community to develop new solutions.
So a very important contribution to industry and academia. But what would you say now that the project finished? What would you say is the legacy of the HypoResolve project?
Yeah, so obviously the data and the samples we gathered during the project, that's a big legacy, and we are working on a sustainability agreement to continue to provide access to data and samples. So that's one thing. There's already actually a queue of researchers wanting to access the data and continue to work on it, because a lot of the analysis takes time, and we are far from having analyzed all the data that we have gathered so far. And also the patient-reported outcome tool is a tool that is very interesting for both industry and also for academia to use in clinical trials. That is something we want to make available through a licensing deal, and so that's also definitely one of the legacy.
Excellent outcomes from both projects, and we understand now how they advanced the research field that they are, and also contributed to the needs of industry. But we have here in the panel today people who live with diabetes, and I assume we have in the audience people who live with diabetes, and they're probably interested to hear more specifically how these results can affect their lives. Bastian, could you tell us what do you think is the difference that your results can make for the lives of people living with diabetes, or how can they help the clinicians that manage their hypoglycemias better?
Yeah, I think it works both ways. So I think both people with diabetes and clinicians may benefit from increased knowledge about predictors and risk factors and consequences of hypoglycemia, including the costs of hypoglycemia, not just in money, but particularly in terms of impact on daily functioning, loss of productivity, call upon family members, a better understanding of psychological aspects, particularly with respect to quality of life, may support people with diabetes in their relationship with their partners and other family members. It's also important to know about the clear definitions so that everybody knows what they talk about when they talk about hypoglycemia, particularly in patient clinician consultations when discussing glucose-lowering interventions that increases or potentially decreases risk of hypoglycemia, be it drugs or technology or psychological interventions. And I think clinicians particularly may benefit from understanding the pathway underlying the relation between hypoglycemia and cardiovascular outcomes to make better choices, including for cardiovascular risk factor management. And finally, I think the hypomedic study has shown that sensory detected hypoglycemia and patient-reported events are two different events or two sides of the same coin, I think, that are equally important to discuss in patient-clinician consultation. And this is important for both people with diabetes and doctors to realize.
Important knowledge for the clinicians. They manage their disease. So, Maria, to you, for BEAt-DKD, the results that you produce, how can you explain us how they can impact those living with diabetes and how they can help the clinicians to treat kidney disease?
Yes, I think putting at the center diabetes heterogeneity, acknowledging that the disease is not only one and everybody is presented with the same progression and the same response to treatments, that is very important both for the patients and for the clinicians treating them. I think BEAt-DKD has delivered tools and knowledge to improve that patient stratification, and that not only has potentially a very positive impact in the size of the clinical trials and also potentially the cost of these future clinical trials that will be needed to get regulatory approval for any new treatment. So this increased knowledge of heterogeneity and improve tools for patient stratification have the possibility to accelerate this improved management of DKD. And then also, I think I mentioned it already, prime CKD, and that this pipeline for discovery of biomarkers that are predictive of response to treatment, especially in response to SGLT2 inhibitors or endothelin receptor blockers, and also treatments with mineralocorticoid receptor antagonists. We do have now much better tools and biomarkers that can inform us whether the patients are responding or not. And that will have, I mean, we are testing this clinical implementation, trying to identify bottlenecks of how can we change the standard of care from being one size fits all to really having a more biomarker guided management where you can adjust faster and more appropriately who is receiving what and when. So I think altogether is incrementing and adding up to an improved management and treatment of DKD.
That could in the future improve the standard of care for kidney disease. Thank you, Maria. So now let's bring it to the discussion, Mike and Ken, the two who live with diabetes. So what was very special about these two IMI projects is that they involved people living with diabetes very actively in the project's work and in different roles. So it is interesting to hear what they have to say. So Mike, you participated in a clinical study on imaging. We heard the BEAt study for diabetes kidney disease. Could you tell us what was your experience as participant in the study and what results do you hope it will generate?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, I'm a retired pharmacist and I have type 2 diabetes. I found the research very interesting and I'm actually very confident that the findings and the general data that we have discovered, shared with others, will lead to an improvement in the treatment and understanding of type 2 diabetes and diabetic kidney disease. A factor that's very important to me is for the first time in my experience, there seems to be a reduction in life expectancy, a very significant fact, largely due to the incidence of diabetes, diabetic kidney disease, and of course, obesity. So I have a great interest in this topic.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Ken, I would like to come to you. So you participated as a member of the Patient Advisory Committee for the HypoResolve project. So that's an interesting role. Can you tell us what did that entail and how you felt participating in such a large public-private consortium?
Yes, thanks. As somebody also living with type 2 diabetes and being a member of the PAC, as we used to call it, and I like to think that what we brought to the table was a different dimension to the research and thing. What I've found fantastic was that we're usually sought after our voice rather than just using us for feedback on anything that was coming up. For an example, I helped with the co-design of the new PRO, as everybody was talking about, the patient recorded outcome, and that to me was a fantastic experience in that area. Being a psychotherapist is probably much more enjoyable. What being involved as a PAC member is that we need to be at the heart of research, at the co-design, and also at the co-creation of it.
Thank you, Ken. Important message. So I would like to now ask both of you how you think the results that we have discussed today can reach the people living with diabetes. Can you give me your opinion, Mike?
Thank you. Well, I think the first thing is that it's absolutely vital that the findings are made available to clinicians, researchers, and patients alike, and they must be presented in user-friendly language. I sit here as, if you like, potentially as a patient, and I think it's very important that patients understand exactly how this really good work that's being carried out passes on to them for their benefit. I think information technology will be a very valuable tool, especially to the younger generation. And the objective for me must be to educate patients to empower them to take responsibility for their own health care. I think this is so important. So if that is to be, patients need to understand why different treatments are needed. It is important that they ensure adherence and compliance with treatment and thereby improve health. From a pharmacist point of view, to me, this is so important. All this good work is in vain unless compliance is adhered to, and compliance with treatments is absolutely key for patients going forward.
Indeed, indeed. Thank you very much, Mike. So I would like now to move to another point. All these results that we discussed were achieved in the frame of public-private partnerships under IMI. I would like to ask the speakers why you think the public-private partnership was essential to achieve the results of the project. Can I come to you first, Matthias?
Yes, thank you. And yeah, I think it's a bit related to what I mentioned earlier around that we have all the stakeholders in the project represented, and it's a co-development, co-creation process where we share insights, perspectives, and come to a better solution jointly. So that's really the huge benefit here, that we have a collaboration between many different research fields and different parts of the ecosystem. And that's a very unique thing, which we wouldn't be able to drive ourselves, for example, as a company like Novo Nordisk, for example. So this relationship in the project was really important, but also it's a good platform to engage with other entities like authorities. For example, I mentioned the regulatory or health technology assessment authorities, where it's kind of a neutral ground to discuss things and get to to work rather than fighting for different stakes. So that's, I think, the unique value of this from my side.
Thanks, Matthias. Bastian, what is your view? Why was it needed to have a public-private partnership? in HypoResolve?
Yeah, this was actually new to me also, so it was a very good experience to have this. But I think I'd like to stress the open, non-competitive atmosphere and communication that we had in the project, and that was absolutely key. And as Matthijs already said, this could not have been achieved in isolation. We really needed each other. And to highlight just one or two examples, one is the building of the HypoResolve database. And that required input from both academia and industry partners. In particular, the latter needed to be willing to hand over that data to be put in the database, and that was something that nobody thought was possible. But in the end, we achieved that. And the hypomedic study, where we looked at the sensor detected hypoglycemic events in relation to patient-reported outcome, that was really a result of collaboration between academia and industry partners, all industry partners that were in the project. So I think this could not have been achieved if we'd done this in isolation.
Thank you, Bastian. Maria, what is your take? Why was it essential to have a public-private partnership to achieve what you managed to achieve in BEAt-DKD?
Yeah, I think I share what has been said by Bastian and Matthijs fully. I do agree that it was very much needed to have this pre-competitive space, like a round table where everybody could be there contributing without feeling any kind of negative competition. It really, the fact that the funding mechanism in itself is very unique in that you come out with a need, a gap that is an actual unmet need, and during all the processes from the conception of the idea that will then lead to the project, all partners are involved, and that kind of builds trust throughout the process of generating a question that we can all gather, and we can all have very complementary skills and assets and resources that can put there on that open table for discussion and for use. So I think it's a very agile work of working. The groups that are put together are very dynamic and very complementary, and that generates a lot of momentum and incredible resources.
Thanks, Maria. And Kevin, from your side, what is your view?
I think one thing that really helps in terms of having a consortium is the access to patients. We in industry, when we start clinical trials, we tend to have very homogeneous type patients that are enrolled in the trial. And by interacting with people in the academic community who've collected much larger cohorts of patients, they really have the heterogeneity that we need to study disease and the understanding of the mechanisms.
Thank you, Kevin. So we all highlight building trust, sharing data and other resources, and collaborating in the pre-competitive space is very, very important. Thank you. So before closing, I would like to ask all our speakers today to give us, if you like, a wish for the future of diabetes research. Can you do that? Shall I start with you, Mike? What would be your wish for the future of diabetes research?
Thank you. I think communication to patients is absolutely vital. We must never lose sight of patients. Patient empowerment must follow effective communication of the outcomes of all this tremendous work. The objective to improve the health of the population, which is a win-win, of course, for the patients, but also for the cost to the healthcare providers.
Thank you, Mike. Ken?
I would say keep doing what you're doing. But we have a saying, nothing about us without us.
Thank you again. Very important point. Matthijs, what would be your wish for diabetes research?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So I think what we can work more on and do more is really work on this data sharing, of course in a safe and private fashion. So with the GDPR compliant and so on, but really put in systems, especially in Europe. We have many different national systems to have patient data, for example, where we can do that sharing more, because that would ultimately really improve the solutions out there and understanding of disease pathways.
Thank you, Matthijs. Bastian?
Yeah, I think our very good experience in HypoResolve, not just with industry partners, but also patient organizations, as scan in the PAC is, should we take one step forward further to increase collaboration between people with lived experience and researchers to set the research agenda?
Thanks, Sebastian. Maria?
Yes, I think from what we learned, we are in a position in which we can shift a little bit the focus towards even earlier detection and management and a bit more of a prevention. I think that is important. We are in a much better position to be able to do that now. And then the other thing is that we are generating so much information at an incredible speed, but we haven't really caught up or good enough in integrating all these almost live information that is coming into something that really generates very contemporary and high quality data, including also longitudinal data, and also to be able to more or less visualize how the new medications, we're in a very fortunate position that we are introducing a lot of new medications, but we're not very good in being able to visualize how this is changing the landscape of the disease. So faster, longitudinal, and more real-time data to be able to monitor what is happening. That's my wish.
Thanks, Maria. And Kevin, what would be your wish for the future of diabetes research?
My key message is just keep going. Scientific discovery is a journey. It's not a sprint. It's a journey that's built on past discoveries and past observations. And I think we can all see that we're making really good progress. And so the message is just keep going.
Thank you very much, Kevin. It's a very positive message for the future. So let's see now if we have questions from our audience for our speakers. So give me 1 second to pull up the questions. So one question is, how did you ensure data privacy? So I'm not sure into which project, but maybe both of you could answer that question. Yes, Kevin, you want to answer? Please?
Sure. So all the samples that we use in the IMI are based on patients signing informed consents. And so, and then we anonymize all the data that goes into the databases such that patients' privacy is protected.
Matthias or Bastian, is there anything else you want to add?
Yeah, so what basically the exercise we did for the big HypoResolve pool database is that we de-identify the data completely, so patients cannot be identified and worked on the pool database. So that's there were measures put in place, but it also means actually, and I can see there's another question on this access to data. We cannot just make that data available for everybody, so that there is access restrictions in the access committee. So if a researcher wants to access, for example, the data for research use, that's possible, but it has to be approved by data access committee.
Exactly. Then there was another question on that. If the consortium collected any open research data that is made publicly available. So thank you, Matthias. You have already answered. Maria, is something that you want to add on that for BEAt-DKD?
Yes, I think the most important thing is to visualize what we have. So we put a lot of effort in generating like a meta description of the resources that were generated. And then obviously we need to respect the ethical permits that are behind the generation of the data, the informed consents. We need to look, there's a lot of detail and granularity to the decisions of whether to use and to have it how open and to who and for what. So all that given, I think the most important thing is to make the data visually, the description of what we have, so people can approach whoever is the guardian of the data and get access.
Great. Thank you very much, Maria. Thank you all for your contribution today and for your time. We will close here. We have more questions, but we have run out of time. Thank you again. And for the audience, this webinar is recorded and it will be available on our website on the event page that you register in the following days. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.